My parents sold my $5,000 car to fund my brother's vacation, so I left without warning. When I came back, the revenge I pulled broke their control. I'm a 24-year-old guy, and for the longest time, I believed my family was normal. I'm a 24-year-old guy, and for the longest time, I believed my family was normal. Every morning, I'd wake up before anyone else, brewing coffee, packing lunches, and double-checking my younger brother Mark's schedule because, for some reason, no one else seemed to care. I worked part-time while finishing college, juggling assignments and shifts, always making sure the house ran smoothly. My parents rarely noticed the effort. They praised Mark for his charm, his jokes, and the way he could get away with doing almost nothing. It was exhausting, but I convinced myself that responsibility was my role, my duty as the eldest, and that someday it would be recognized. Mark, on the other hand, floated through life. He slept late, skipped classes when he wanted, and yet he'd charm everyone at family dinners. "You should loosen up, buddy," my father would say, laughing as Mark recounted some trivial story. My mom would swoop in with praises for his creativity and natural talent, while I quietly fixed the mess he left behind or handled the bills he forgot. The contrast between us was glaring, but I had learned to swallow the bitterness, convincing myself that sacrifices were just part of growing up. Outwardly, we were the perfect family. Friends and relatives would compliment us on our close bond, our polite dinners, our tidy home. They had no idea about the silent tensions, the passive-aggressive comments Mark would throw at me under the guise of joking, or the way my parents turned a blind eye to my efforts while spotlighting his mistakes as teachable moments for him. Late at night, I sometimes wondered if it was fair. I noticed the favoritism, the imbalance, but I pushed the thoughts down. After all, I was the responsible one. Someone had to keep the illusion alive, and that someone, as always, was me. By the time I was 24, resentment had quietly started to settle in my chest. I worked 2 part-time jobs on top of my college schedule, stretching every dollar and every hour to make sure our household ran smoothly. Meanwhile, Mark seemed to float through life, never held accountable, never asked to chip in. Yet he was always the golden child in my parents' eyes. Every small accomplishment of his was met with applause. Passing a single exam, getting a part-time gig, or even managing to clean his room without being told. And there I was, silently paying bills, running errands, and keeping everything together. While my contributions were ignored or simply expected, the $5,000 car I'd finally saved for felt like a symbol of my independence. I had spent years sacrificing nights out, cutting my spending, and picking up extra shifts to make it mine. When I proudly showed my parents the papers, I expected at the very least acknowledgement. Instead, my dad patted my shoulder and said, "It's yours, but remember, we're still responsible for you, so you can't complain." My mom added a smile that didn't reach her eyes, nodding as if my efforts were nothing extraordinary. That moment should have been one of pride, but it left a hollow ache. Mark, of course, had received a brand new bike last year for his hard work in school, which required far less effort than mine. My parents cheered him on, acting like he'd achieved something monumental. I forced a smile at the injustice, telling myself this was normal, that someday they'd recognize me. But deep down, I felt a flicker of frustration that refused to die. I was tired of being the mature one, the responsible one, the child who gave endlessly without reward. I wanted acknowledgement, fairness, even a little appreciation, but it never came. And for the first time, I wondered how long I could keep pretending everything was fine before I snapped. I came home one Thursday evening, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, looking forward to the small comfort of my own space and my car. But when I walked into the driveway, a sinking feeling hit me. My $5,000 car was gone, completely gone. My heart raced, confusion and disbelief mingling as I ran inside. "Where's my car?" I demanded, my voice shaky. My dad looked up from the living room, calm as ever. "We sold it," he said, almost casually. I froze. "Sold it? Why? To who?" "To fund Mark's vacation abroad," my mom interjected, her tone light, almost cheerful. "He worked hard for this trip. You understand, right? It's for the family." For a moment, I couldn't process the words. I had spent years saving for that car, sacrificing small comforts, picking up extra shifts. And now it was gone, vanished. So Mark could enjoy a carefree holiday he didn't earn. My chest tightened with anger and disbelief. "You can't just sell my car without asking me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My father shrugged, as if the concept of boundaries didn't exist. "It's a necessary investment for Mark's future," he said again. The words rehearsed, the logic infuriatingly firm. My mom added softly, "We're trying to teach you responsibility too. Sometimes you have to put the family first." I felt the sting of betrayal deepen. The manipulation was obvious, guilt-tripping me into accepting this injustice for the sake of Mark and the family. My blood boiled, but I clenched my fists and swallowed the outrage. I couldn't let them see how much it hurt, how much I felt unseen. That night, lying on my bed, I stared at the ceiling and realized something terrifying. I was not only undervalued, I was being deliberately erased in favor of Mark, and this, I knew, was only the beginning. Every time I scrolled through social media that week, my blood boiled a little more. Mark's face grinned from the screen, lounging by a pristine pool, sipping drinks I couldn't even afford to look at twice. Each post, each filtered photo, screamed entitlement and carelessness. I had spent years sacrificing nights, weekends, and even friendships to work multiple jobs, to save, to build a foundation for my own independence. And now my efforts were treated like background noise, irrelevant compared to the luxury vacation I hadn't even known existed until my car disappeared. I confronted Mark once over a video call. "You have no idea what it's like to struggle, to earn something with your own blood and sweat," I said, voice taut. He laughed lightly, brushing it off. "Chill, man. It's just a trip. Mom and Dad said it's fine." His obliviousness stung sharper than any insult. It wasn't just his ignorance. It was the way my parents encouraged it, excusing his every whim as a reward, while treating me like a shadow in my own home. Dinner became unbearable. Every conversation seemed to revolve around Mark's stories, the beaches, the nightlife, the friends he met. My parents nodded, laughed, and asked him questions, all while barely acknowledging my existence. I felt invisible, like nothing I did mattered. The frustration and humiliation coiled inside me, growing with every compliment they threw at him. Late at night, I lay in my room staring at the ceiling, a quiet storm raging inside. I realized something I had been avoiding. I couldn't keep living like this. Their control, their favoritism, their constant manipulation, it was suffocating me. I needed out. I began planning quietly, meticulously, not recklessly, but with the cold clarity of someone who had been pushed too far. The breaking point was approaching, and when it came, they would see exactly how far their blind favoritism had driven me. That night, after another dinner filled with Mark's stories and my parents' unearned praise, I made a decision I had been rehearsing silently for weeks. I couldn't stay, couldn't endure another day of being invisible, undervalued, and used as the family's silent laborer. Quietly, I packed my essentials, clothes, a few personal items, and the little cash I had saved from years of side jobs. I left behind the apartment that had become a cage, every corner a reminder of my sacrifices being overlooked. Before stepping out, I sent a short message to my parents. "I need some time alone. Please respect my space." Nothing more. No explanations, no pleading, no attempts to justify myself. It was the simplest, yet most freeing act I had taken in years. With a deep breath, I walked out the door, leaving behind the invisible chains of expectation, favoritism, and manipulation. The silence afterward was deafening. No one called, no one chased me, but I knew the message had landed. My parents would talk about it among themselves, maybe roll their eyes, shrug, and dismiss it as another phase. Mark would joke about my dramatic tendencies, oblivious to the storm I left behind. I didn't need their validation or their understanding. For the first time, I felt like I was steering my own life. Untethered from their control, the city's streets felt alive beneath my feet. The cool night air carrying a hint of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. Every step forward was a statement. I existed outside their narrative, outside the family illusion they had so carefully constructed. Yet, as exhilarated as I felt, a flicker of uncertainty lingered. I had broken away, yes, but what came next? Independence was thrilling, but it was also terrifying. I was free, but the path forward was uncharted. I couldn't shake the sense that something bigger, something inevitable, was waiting just beyond the horizon. The first few days alone were strange. The apartment felt empty in a way that wasn't uncomfortably, it was liberating. I could eat what I wanted, sleep when I wanted, and for the first time, make decisions without anticipating someone else's approval. But freedom, I quickly realized, came with its own weight. Bills still existed. Responsibilities couldn't vanish just because I left. And while I was relieved to escape the family's suffocating expectations, I couldn't shake the lingering anger and hurt every time my phone buzzed with a notification. My heart skipped a beat, hoping it wasn't my mother or father checking in. When I saw Mark tagged in vacation photos online, smiling and laughing, the anger flared anew. How could they think it was acceptable to erase years of my effort while celebrating his every whim? The injustice was bitter, a constant companion that gnawed at the edge of my newfound calm. Despite the emotional turbulence, I began to explore small victories. I cooked my meals exactly how I liked, rearranged furniture, and even played music without anyone judging my taste. Each little choice reminded me that I could live on my own terms, that the identity my family had ignored was valid and real. I started jotting down plans for my future, where to move next, how to save, how to finally pursue things that mattered to me instead of what they dictated. Yet, freedom also exposed cracks I hadn't noticed before. Loneliness seeped in during quiet evenings. The weight of decisions, big and small, pressed on me. I realized independence wasn't just liberation. It was responsibility, accountability, and an ongoing test of resolve. But through it all, a spark remained. A determination to never return to the shadows of my family's favoritism. For the first time, I felt both scared and powerful, standing at the edge of a life I could shape. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was just the beginning. Something significant was coming. Whether I was ready for it or not. A week into my independence, I started noticing things I had never realized while living under my parents' roof. Old conversations, offhand comments, and subtle behaviors all began to make sense in a new, bitter light. I remembered how Mark never faced real consequences, how my parents' words about responsibility were always selective, and how my sacrifices were minimized or ignored. The clarity was painful, but it also fueled a quiet resolve within me. I would no longer allow their manipulation to define my life. Then came the unexpected twist. I received an email from a distant relative I barely knew, someone who had always kept tabs on our family dynamics. The message was simple, but striking. I've noticed how much you've sacrificed while Mark always gets the rewards. Don't let them gaslight you. You deserve recognition, and opportunities are waiting if you step out. It was a small message, but it hit harder than any argument or confrontation ever could. Someone outside my family saw what I had been blind to, and their words ignited something inside me. I realized the world didn't have to mirror my family's distorted values. My hard work, my dedication, and my resilience were valid, even if they had been dismissed for years. I spent that night scribbling plans, ideas, and possibilities, my mind buzzing with the potential of life untethered from favoritism and unfair expectations. But even with this newfound clarity, anger lingered. Every memory of Mark's carefree lifestyle, my parents' dismissive smiles, and the betrayal of my car still stung. I felt a mix of liberation and frustration, as if I had broken free only to face the long shadow of past wrongs. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized the next steps were crucial. I could either let the past define me, or I could turn the betrayal into fuel for my own future. And somewhere deep down, I knew the path forward would demand risks, confrontations, and decisions I wasn't sure I was ready to face by the second week of my independence. The initial thrill of freedom had settled into a determined focus. I couldn't ignore the lessons I'd learned from my family: favoritism, manipulation, and entitlement. If I wanted a life that truly belonged to me, I had to act deliberately, without relying on anyone else's approval or validation. I began drafting a plan, step by step, mapping out how to secure financial stability, personal space, and emotional autonomy. Every decision was strategic. I made a budget, researched career opportunities, and explored neighborhoods where I could finally build a home. I controlled entirely. Mark's posts continued to flood my social media, each picture a reminder of what my family considered deserving. I felt a rush of anger, but I learned to channel it into motivation rather than resentment. I reminded myself that I wasn't powerless anymore. I had the ability to choose, to move forward, and to define my own worth. Then came the first small victories. I found a side project that paid better than any of my previous part-time jobs. It's given me a sense of accomplishment that had been denied at home. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, savoring the authenticity of relationships untainted by favoritism or expectation. For the first time, my talents, effort, and energy were rewarded directly, without someone else taking credit. Still, the past lingered like a shadow. Every memory of Mark's carefree life, my parents' dismissive smiles, and the car they'd sold gnawed at me. I knew I couldn't fully move on until I confronted the emotional imbalance and claimed my independence entirely. Lying in bed one night, I looked at the ceiling and made a silent promise. I would not let them define me, nor would I allow my sacrifices to be erased. The path forward was uncertain, but the first sparks of a plan to reclaim my life and my dignity were firmly in place. The question now wasn't if I could succeed. It was how far I was willing to go to finally take control. Weeks passed, and with each day, my independence felt more solid, but the memories of my family's favoritism haunted me. I realized that staying silent had allowed the imbalance to persist for too long. If I wanted closure, or at least some acknowledgement, I had to confront them not with anger, but with clarity and self-respect. I drafted a message to my parents, careful with every word. I didn't demand apologies or explanations. I simply stated the facts, the car, the favoritism, the countless sacrifices they had overlooked. When I sent it, I felt a mixture of dread and relief. Part of me expected dismissal, another wave of guilt-tripping, and maybe even Mark's smug commentary. I braced myself for the inevitable, their attempts to twist the narrative in his favor. Yet I also knew that this was a step toward reclaiming my voice, my story, and my dignity. The first reply arrived quickly. My mother's words were measured, almost rehearsed. We always tried to do what was best for the family. You have to understand that Mark is young and sometimes needs guidance. My father chimed in with, "We raised you well, and your sacrifices are appreciated. But sometimes tough decisions have to be made for the greater good." Appreciation? I felt none of it. Their guidance and tough decisions were excuses for ignoring my life entirely. Mark, of course, remained blissfully unaware, laughing at his own posts, enjoying the perks of a family that enabled him. But for the first time, I felt untouchable. I wasn't begging for approval, and I wasn't letting manipulation dictate my emotions. I had cut the ties, at least emotionally, and now I could see them for what they truly were, flawed, selfish, and blind to the consequences of their actions. That night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something profound. The family illusion they had maintained for years was crumbling not because they changed, but because I had finally stepped out of its shadow, and in that quiet, painful clarity, I understood that the next step wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. Life on my own had revealed both freedom and responsibility. But the turning point came when I realized I no longer needed my family's validation. For years I had measured my worth against their expectations, silently enduring favoritism and emotional manipulation. Now, the distance gave me perspective. My sacrifices weren't meaningless. They were building blocks for a life that belonged entirely to me. I began to see my parents and Mark clearly, not as the people I wanted them to be, but as they actually were. Flawed, entitled, and unaptuary. The first act of real empowerment came unexpectedly. I had saved enough from my jobs to move into a small apartment I could call my own. A place where no one could dictate how I lived. Unpacking my belongings, I felt a sense of liberation that was intoxicating. For the first time, I controlled my schedule, my space, and my energy. I was untethered, free to invest in myself, my passions, and my future without fear of judgment or sabotage. But freedom wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I blocked my parents and Mark from social media completely. No notifications, no updates, no passive-aggressive posts to remind me of their skewed priorities. Their voices, once so loud and controlling in my mind, began to fade. Each day that passed without their interference strengthened my confidence and resolve. And yet, the past still lingered in quiet, sharp edges. Memories of the car, the dismissals, and Mark's carefree privilege were still there. But I no longer allowed them to define me. I had been wronged, yes, but the power to choose my reaction and my life was now fully mine. That evening, standing by my window and watching the city lights flicker, I felt a mix of relief, pride, and anticipation. I had survived the family's manipulation, claimed my independence, and stepped into a life I could finally shape. The real question now wasn't who they were, was who I would become. Months passed. With each day of independence, I grew stronger, sharper, and more self-assured. The anger that had once simmered quietly inside me transformed into a steady determination. I no longer felt like a secondary character in my own life. I was reclaiming control, piece by piece, making decisions that honored my effort and my worth. Every paycheck, every choice, every small victory was a statement. I existed outside the shadow of favoritism, and I would no longer let anyone dictate my value. One evening, I received a call from a colleague who mentioned an opportunity I had been eyeing for years. It was a chance to lead a project, to prove my capabilities in a way my family had never acknowledged. I took it immediately, feeling a surge of triumph. Unlike the accolades Mark received for minimal effort, this achievement was entirely my own. I allowed myself to savor it. No guilt, no apology, just the quiet pride of accomplishment. Despite my successes, the past still haunted me in small, persistent ways. Mark continued to flaunt his life online, unaware of the emotional scars he had caused. My parents occasionally sent texts that veiled criticism as concern, but I had learned to see through the manipulation, to separate my peace from their attempts to control it. I refused to react, refusing to let their words diminish the life I had built. One evening, I sat on my balcony, the city lights casting reflections in my eyes. I realized the truth. I had survived years of favoritism, betrayal, and manipulation, and emerged not broken, but empowered. I had taken the life that had been denied to me and made it my own. The path forward was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt entirely in charge. I understood that revenge wasn't about retaliation. It was about rising above, about refusing to let them write my story. And in that quiet triumph, I knew one thing for certain. I would never allow anyone to diminish me again. A year had passed since I walked out that door, and in that time, my life had transformed completely. The weight of favoritism, manipulation, and betrayal that had once defined my days was gone. I had built a home I loved, cultivated friendships that valued me, pursued career opportunities that reflected my dedication and talent. I no longer needed my family's validation, or anyone else's for that matter. My independence was no longer a fragile experiment. It was a reality I had fought for and earned. Then, unexpectedly, my phone buzzed. It was my younger brother, Mark. The message was brief. "I want to talk. I realized things weren't fair, and I'm sorry. Can we meet?" My heart skipped, not out of excitement, but with cautious curiosity. My parents had not changed, their favoritism still lingering, but here was Mark, extending an olive branch that I hadn't anticipated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue my life unbothered. Another part, however, recognized an opportunity not for approval, but for closure. I agreed to meet, not to forgive blindly, but to assert the boundaries I had finally claimed. The conversation was awkward at first. Mark admitted how entitled he had been, how blind he was to my sacrifices, and for the first time, acknowledged my worth. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase years of hurt, but it was a start. I realized that empowerment wasn't just about cutting people out, it was about choosing who mattered. Who deserved space in your life, and who didn't. Walking away from that meeting, I felt a sense of peace, I had never known. The past still existed, but it no longer controlled me. I had survived manipulation, favoritism, and betrayal, and, in doing so, had forged a life entirely my own. I was free, respected, and finally fully seen. For the first time, I smiled not at the approval of others, but at the reflection of someone who had endured, learned, and emerged stronger than ever.